have these subjects affected you from a personal level? What made
Thank you,
consider? Oh, pleasure. What made you consider these subjects as very important?
Thank you for raising that. And I would like to acknowledge as well the fact on how you defined actually diversity and inclusion, because obviously it's about being open to diversity, not only in gender, but also, you know, the backgrounds of different people. I would say diversity of opinions. And then including those people. And I would go even further, and we'll talk a little bit about not only inclusion, but also engagement. How do you keep the conversation going? Because we don't know what we don't know, right? We learn about it. And I think obviously sometimes when we talk about diversity and inclusion, we think it's only about gender, but it's not only about gender. I think we are beyond that. Obviously, gender is one part of it, and the discussion is still ongoing in terms of, you know, including more women. I am, for instance, you know, an advocate for women in STEM, because the STEM fields, which are, you know, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, we still have very low, I would say, percentages of women participating in that for various reasons, obviously. And so I think coming from STEM myself, I was shaped by that, because I'm actually born and brought up in Tunisia. And then I left when I was 17 years old to study in Germany. And I studied computer science. And in computer science, we had very, very, very little percentage, which was already a surprise for me, because
I'm sorry, Dalil, I'm not able to hear you. I'm not sure if it's my network issue.
Fine.
I'm sorry.
Me too.
Okay, then I'm sorry. Then probably it's my internet connection issue. Please continue, Dalil, please.
Okay, so I can wait a little bit if you want to adjust, Sita,
no,
or you're
fine.
fine.
It's
yeah?
fine. I'm able to hear you again. Thank you.
Okay. So I think I was fortunate enough to, as I said, was brought up in Tunisia, where we actually had equal rights for women and men. And actually the education level is very high in women. But went to Germany, and in the STEM field, we were less than 10% of women attending these courses. So for me, it was a little bit of a surprise. And I was asking around why women actually are not studying these kind of fields. And I could see that they were going either to HR or marketing, but not to the STEM fields. Obviously, this has changed a little bit since then, but it's still very low compared. We haven't come to equity, I would say, in that field. So. And I think that's, you know, shaping me personally was actually to try to push more women into the STEM field. So throughout my career, I was involved with 1 million women mentors, which are actually supporting getting more girls into STEM fields, also ensuring that the companies hire more women in their early careers, and retaining them, because the first 5 years are extremely important. So mentoring them in the first years before they exit, because there's always a risk when they start to go into other fields. So these were a few things. I would say that personally as well, in 2006, my son was diagnosed with cancer. I was fortunate enough to be able to take 1 year and go with him. He got actually, you know, a treatment in Italy. And at that time I was working for the Dubai World Trade Center. So my direct manager was an Emirati lady. She said, don't worry about anything. Your position is here. Go take care of your family. And obviously it was a difficult situation for any family member who has to take care of a child who was under treatment. Thank God he's fine. But I think I learned a lot from that experience, which is about how do you incorporate in the organization these kind of situations of employees who might go through taking care of elderly people, of children, of sickness. This is also being inclusive. of adjusting and accepting that, you know, situations can be different. I had a similar colleague. Yeah,
I'm sorry, you're quite right, Dalal. However, how have you been able to incorporate this learning into your work? I think we would love to know about that.
yeah. So I think as a leader afterwards, when I became a leader in the organization and having employees, I was always trying to listen to them. You know, sometimes we tend to evaluate employees based on performance. They have performed, they haven't performed, but I think it's important to get closer to them and listen. What are the problems that are causing the performance? It's not necessarily always ability. Sometimes there are situations in their life that actually pushes them not to perform or to struggle. So it's important to actively listen to the, you know, to the team, to the employees, and try to be open to those experiences and diverse points of views. Also to, as a leader, to shape the culture within the organization. I think I've been fortunate enough to be with multinationals that have incorporated a lot of changes in terms of being diverse and inclusive, but there are certain organizations that are still very early on, and I think it's important to shape that culture of the organization, but also the regulations within the organization to be more open to diversity and inclusion as a whole. Obviously, there are different cases. Yeah.
I think what you have shared with us is also, I would say, giving me ideas to know a little more from you. That you talked about some of the workplaces where you have been fortunate to work and thrive and learn from, including some of the top world's multinational companies. On a scale of 10, Dalil, where would you say that we are currently today as a woman leader? Where would you say we are currently today on a scale of 10 as far as inclusivity, diversity, and equity goes?
You mean gender, from a gender perspective, or overall?
No, overall, I'm talking about not just gender, because I think we are seeing a huge difference, especially in the last, I think, couple of decades, how far women have moved on in terms of their progress and development. So I'm talking about from the overall perspective.
Okay, so let me correct one thing. Let me correct one thing on the women's side, because I think that, yes, we have done a lot of strides in terms of the women understanding and the women pushing to be there. I don't think we have educated the men enough to be more inclusive and accepting. So there's a lot to be done there. And I think that it's important to live those values as well, because I know enough of organizations who actually go out there, talk a lot about, I'm just going to say, gender diversity and inclusion, but they don't live them. I'll give you an example. I think if you don't, we always know the saying, if you know, it will not happen if you don't measure it. So if you don't put goals in place, and I'm just going to talk about gender, but we'll move to other topics after. If you don't put measures, if you want to achieve, for instance, gender diversity, you need to put certain measures. How much are you trying to achieve in terms of gender diversity? Otherwise, it will not happen. And yes, obviously, it is much more difficult in certain fields to find women with certain competencies to get that job. And you might have 10 male candidates compared to 1 or 2. It's important not to compromise on competencies. So it's important that you are not letting go of the standard that you're looking for. But of course, this will lead to things like you might need to extend a little bit the timeline of recruitment, because it's not easy to find the candidates if you are putting certain restrictions. At least give it a chance to find someone with these competencies. So I think once you put those measures in place, you can then drive these forward. And now it's also about hiring but also retaining and further developing. It's not only getting the numbers there, it's how do you maintain these numbers? Because you don't want the people to leave, right? So you want to make sure that they are well incorporated, that they are actually, getting the right development, and so forth and so on. And so, for instance, to your point, Sita, I don't think that companies have, or many companies have, for instance, good programs in place to onboard, returning mothers after a few years. Not many companies have these programs. So you need to equip as well certain diverse populations in the organization to allow them to thrive in the organization. Are we there? I don't think generally we are. I think some companies are better than others. I'll give you another example, which is not gender based. When I've been working in PepsiCo for 8 years, responsible for Middle East Africa from a information technology perspective. Mm-hmm. The Saudi factory for manufacturing site for Lay's has actually incorporated people of determination, hearing impaired, in the factory. Okay. And they had obviously to equip the floor, the manufacturing floor, for them because they can't hear. So there were other equipments and so on. And it's not only about training them on certain activities, it's also incorporating them into the normal workforce who needed to understand how to react and how to work with these people. So you cannot just, as I said, it's not only about hiring or talking about it, it's really equipping, yes, putting the right environments in place, and also educating the other people about it.
Yes, you're right. You're so right. I think we will come to that point. Thank you very much, Dilel. I think we will come to the point on how do we exactly effectively enable the workplace culture to become a lot more favorable to these subjects, because they make so much of a positive impact to the environment there. So we'll come back to that a little later. So we will move on and discuss about what are some of the benefits that we stand to gain in ensuring we incorporate these subjects into the workplace or the organizational culture, which is, of course, that is winning talent and improving the quality of decision making, increasing customer insight and innovation, and of course, driving employee motivation and satisfaction as well. So how can organizations foster an inclusive workplace? I think it comes from ensuring that diverse talent is well represented. Now, when we talk about representation, Dilil, I'd like to come back to you here. How have the organizations that you have worked in, how have they been able to pay attention to how well the diversity is represented in their company, or has it been given to that level of attention?
No, I think that's a very good question. Because you can't, so when you do in corporations, it's about putting programs, but also getting feedback about how effective these programs are. So I think it's important to listen for feedback and have open conversations about it. So for instance, I'll give you an example in PepsiCo where they were actually putting measures around certain leadership roles where they wanted to have more women representation. And they brought the leaders in the room to discuss those numbers and have a conversation. And I know that a lot of male leaders were upset about it because they said it's unfair. If you find, a competent male, why would that person not be able to take that job? And there was an open conversation about it because they said, we do understand, but ultimately, if we do not try to push certain numbers, obviously without compromising the competencies, I think that's a very important point because there are organizations which went the other extreme. of trying to push numbers, but also compromising competencies. And I want to reiterate the fact that we should not compromise on the competencies and the abilities. If you don't put those measures and you don't push the initiatives to hire these diverse workforce, and that could be nationality, not gender. That could be a certain nationality. You want to have diverse cultures and so on. It's not going to happen. And yes, it will upset other people because they know that they will have less chances. But there is no other way to do it. How would you do it differently?
Yes. That's very, very true. I think that is very interesting. Good point there, Janelle. So I think apart from ensuring diverse talent is well represented, it's also about strengthening leadership accountability and capabilities. And of course, being fair and transparent. So thereby enabling equality of opportunity, which also I think makes a huge difference when it comes to managing a very healthy, diverse, and inclusive workplace environment. And I think another point would be to promote openness and tackle microaggression, bias, and discrimination. Dalil, once again, coming back to you, how have you faced or have you known of cases in terms of how the organization has conducted or managed problems relating to microaggression from the diversity or inclusivity or equity perspective?
So when you talk about microaggression, do you mean bullying or?
It could be something very, very significant at the same time, not very clear, like passive aggression.
So I think, look, the best way to do it is running awareness programs around that. What is acceptable within an organization and what is not acceptable. And train everyone on it. I always say you cannot assume that everyone has the same definition for everything. And I always take the example of integrity. People understand integrity differently, but it's the same when you say, you talked about microaggression. It's important to know what's the code of ethics, making sure that everyone knows how to behave, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. And if not acceptable, what are actually the mechanisms that you put in place for people to be able to safely go and get support from HR or from a speak-up line or so on. So equipping, I would say, the organization and the people to be able to find the support required, and accordingly, making sure that these things are not tolerated within the organization.
And would you say, thank you, Dalal, but would you say that probably training is one of the key strategies to ensure that this is managed?
Definitely, training is definitely needed. So I would say training is the first step. And then also you need a mechanism in place to be able to escalate if there are issues.
Okay, all right. And yeah. I think one of the things what I have from my, I would say my experience, or I would say from my professional perspective, is that I think every organization can probably benefit from a wellness department. What do you have to say to that, Dalal? I'm not sure how many organizations today have that department, but I think in future, I think that would be a department which would be given more importance to, especially to manage issues which could be arising out of discrimination or exploitation or aggression or microaggression as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think, wellness, it's different. It's about, I've seen programs multinationals have gone through equipping employees with service providers that they have gone and negotiated contracts to talk about any issues you have. Financials, could be in the workplace, There are a lot of coaching as well platforms that came up now that work with corporates so that you have access to a coach or therapist as well. And it could be a personal problem, it could be a family problem. So these are services that certain companies have equipped their employees with for health and wellness purposes. I think the other one, in terms of escalation, I would rather say it needs to be more of a compliance setup. So in the compliance, making sure that there is a process in place, a line in place, and many multinationals went for anonymous lines. So that, there is no reason for retaliation or any trace of retaliation. We call them in PepsiCo, there is a speak up line. It's an 800 number or whatever where you can call and complain about anything that you see is not in line with the code of ethics. It could be an aggression, but it could be an integrity issue. It could be anything which is not compliant with the company guidelines. And that is normally making sure with HR and the compliance team that system is in place. As I said, it can be actually subcontracted to an external company and followed up on. And there are clear measures as well in terms of resolution times and things like that.
And is this the responses? Are they taken with, of course, the complete belief that anonymity would be maintained?
Yes. It's important. Yeah. I know that in not all organizations have equipped with that. So the first source is HR. And I know that you need to trust your HR, obviously, and the organization to be able to highlight things. But at the end of the day, it's how the company is creating that culture of trust, It needs to be a culture of trust where you feel comfortable and safe to go and highlight certain issues. If not, then ultimately you might actually accept it for short term, but that's if it doesn't work for you and it's not safe, obviously the company might lose you. So it's to the benefit of the company to make sure that there is a safe environment there for you to be able to relate these issues to the competent entity.
Okay, thank you, Dylan. I think when we talk about, of course, the microaggression part, definitely I think the suggestions you have made and, of course, your observations you have made on how it can be tackled is something which would add immense value and probably add to the culture of what the guidelines which have been set aside for the company to move forward. And of course, we come to fostering belonging through I think support for all the ways that diversity can manifest as well. And I think organizations can pay attention to, especially for factors, which is diverse, inclusive leadership. That's the first one. And then we come to also initiating and increasing fairness in performance evaluations.